How would you describe Jeffrey as a youngster?
Excuse me, doctor, if you don't mind. We don't know, we don't relate to Jeffrey.
That he decapitated and put on a stake.
That you be put to death by a current of electricity. That the current be passed through your body until you are dead.
Faces of Evil. In the annals of American crime, few names evoke as much fascination and revulsion as Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy. Though separated by time, geography, and method, both men became icons of horror, symbols of humanity's darkest potential. Dahmer, the reclusive Milwaukee loner who turned his apartment into a charnel house, and Bundy, the handsome, articulate law student who weaponized charm to lure victims to their deaths, represent two sides of the same monstrous coin. Their crimes forced society to confront uncomfortable truths, that evil can wear a friendly face, that monsters are not born but made, and that the line between sanity and depravity is perilously thin. Dahmer's victims, primarily young men of color, many struggling on society's margins, were silenced by a killer who saw them as objects to possess, even in death. Bundy's victims, bright, ambitious women, often with long dark hair parted in the middle, were hunted by a predator who craved domination and adulation in equal measure. This documentary is not about glorifying killers, but understanding them. Through the lens of criminology, psychology, and the voices of those who survived their terror, we unravel how two men, shaped by vastly different circumstances, became synonymous with the very concept of evil. Their stories are not just tales of murder, but cautionary sagas about neglect, narcissism, and the systems that failed to stop them. Criminological background, methods, and madness. Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes were as methodical as they were macabre. Between 1978 and 1991, he murdered 17 men and boys, luring many to his Milwaukee apartment with promises of money, alcohol, or companionship. Once inside, he drugged them, strangled them, and dismembered their bodies with surgical precision. He kept skulls as trophies, stored organs in his refrigerator, and even attempted to create zombies by drilling holes into his victims' skulls and injecting hydrochloric acid. For Dahmer, murder was a twisted form of intimacy, a way to exert total control over those he feared would abandon him. His apartment, a cluttered, stench-filled dungeon, became a private laboratory where he could indulge his compulsions undisturbed. Ted Bundy's crimes, by contrast, were nomadic and performative. From 1974 to 1978, he traversed 7 states, targeting young women on college campuses, in parks, and at beaches. His weapon was deception. He impersonated authority figures, feigned injuries to elicit sympathy, and charmed victims into letting their guard down. Once, alone with them, he bludgeoned, raped, and strangled them, often revisiting corpses to apply makeup or engage in necrophilia. Bundy's violence was not just about killing, it was about proving his superiority. He later confessed to keeping heads as trophies, a grisly parallel to Dahmer. But while Dahmer's acts were solitary, Bundy's were theatrical. He thrived on the media's obsession with him, once quipping to investigators, "What's one less person on the face of the earth?" The differences in their victimology are stark. Dahmer preyed on vulnerable men, many black, gay, or struggling with addiction, who society had already overlooked. Bundy targeted women who mirrored his idealized self-image, educated, attractive, and upwardly mobile. Dahmer's crimes were acts of desperation, driven by a fear of abandonment. Bundy's were acts of arrogance, fueled by a belief that he was entitled to take whatever he desired. Psychological background, the making of monsters. Jeffrey Dahmer's descent into madness began in childhood. Born in 1960 to a volatile household, he grew up watching his parents, Joyce and Lionel, engage in bitter arguments. Joyce, who battled severe depression and suicidal ideation, often berated her husband while Lionel, a chemist, withdrew into his work. Young Jeffrey became obsessed with control, dissecting roadkill, hoarding animal bones, and fantasizing about keeping still-living companions. By adolescence, he was a closeted alcoholic, consumed by shame over his homosexuality. His first murder in 1978 was accidental. A hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks died during a drunken struggle. But the act unlocked something in Dahmer, a realization that killing could provide the ultimate control he craved. Ted Bundy's origins are shrouded in deception. Born in 1946 to an unmarried mother, he was raised believing his grandparents were his parents and his mother was his sister. This foundational lie, coupled with his grandfather's violent temper, bred a deep-seated resentment and identity crisis. Bundy grew into a charismatic, yet manipulative figure, excelling academically while secretly stealing and peeping into windows. Unlike Dahmer, who internalized his turmoil, Bundy externalized it, blaming pornography and societal pressures for his urges.
Motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography.
Psychologists, however, point to his pathological narcissism, a need to dominate and own his victims, as the true driver. Both men displayed early warning signs, but their environments responded differently. Dahmer's parents dismissed his disturbing behavior as a phase, while Bundy's charm and intelligence insulated him from suspicion. Dahmer's psychological profile reveals schizotypal personality disorder and paraphilias. Bundy's fits antisocial personality disorder with grandiose delusions. Yet both shared a chilling absence of empathy, treating human lives as disposable props in their private dramas. Biographers, voices from the abyss. The task of humanizing these killers fell to biographers who walked a tightrope between analysis and exploitation. For Bundy, that voice was Anne Rule, a former crime writer who unknowingly worked alongside him at a Seattle suicide hotline. Her book, The Stranger Beside Me, is part memoir, part true crime exposé, grappling with the cognitive dissonance of befriending a killer. Rule's Bundy is a Jekyll and Hyde figure, altruistic to her face, yet capable of unspeakable cruelty. For Dahmer, British author Brian Masters took on the challenge. His book, The Shrine of Jeffrey Dahmer, avoids moralizing, instead dissecting Dahmer's psyche through police interviews and personal letters. Masters portrays Dahmer not as a demon, but as a profoundly lonely man whose addiction to control spiraled into atrocity. Both biographers faced criticism, Rule for her perceived sympathy toward Bundy, Masters for clinical detachment. Yet their work underscores a haunting truth. Monsters are still human, shaped by forces both within and beyond their control. Police investigations, failures, and breakthroughs. Dahmer's reign of terror might have ended earlier had law enforcement heeded the warnings. In 1991, officers returned 14-year-old Conorak synthesom phone to Dahmer's apartment, despite the boy's disorientation and bleeding, a failure later attributed to homophobia and racial bias. Conorak was Laotian. Dahmer's eventual arrest came only after Tracy Edwards, a black man, escaped and flagged down police, leading them to the apartment's horrors. Freezers full of organs, a vat of acid, and Polaroids of dismembered bodies. Bundy's evasion of capture was equally systemic. He exploited jurisdictional gaps between states, altered his appearance, and weaponized his charm to deflect suspicion. After 2 daring jail escapes, including a 1977 flight from a Colorado courthouse, he fled to Florida, where his final spree claimed the lives of 2 Chi Omega sorority sisters and 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. His undoing was a routine traffic stop in Pensacola, where officers found burglary tools and a stolen ID. Dental records later matched Bundy's teeth to bite marks on a victim, a first-of-its-kind forensic breakthrough. Both cases exposed institutional blind spots. Dahmer's victims were ignored due to racism and homophobia. Bundy's were dismissed as runaways until the body count became undeniable. Courts and judgments, theatrics and truth. Bundy's trial was a media circus. Acting as his own attorney in the 1979 Chi Omega trial, he cross-examined survivors with smirking confidence, asking one, "How can you be sure it was me?" Yet forensic evidence, a bite mark on Lisa Levy's buttock, pubic hair matched to Bundy, rendered his theatrics moot. In a final bid for control, he delayed his execution for a decade through appeals, even proposing marriage to a fan while on death row. When he finally confessed to 30 murders in 1989, it was less out of remorse than a desire to relive his greatest hits. Dahmer's 1992 trial was quieter, but no less fraught. He pleaded guilty but insane, claiming his compulsions were irresistible. Psychiatrists debated whether his paraphilias constituted mental illness, but jurors rejected the defense, citing his meticulous planning, buying freezers, stockpiling acid, as proof of rationality. Dahmer showed flickers of remorse, admitting, "I should have stayed with God," a reference to his brief childhood faith. Bundy died in Florida's electric chair in 1989, sneering until the end. Dahmer was beaten to death by a fellow inmate in 1994, his final words reportedly, "I don't care if I live or die." Their fates reflect their lives. Bundy, the performer, exited on a stage. Dahmer, the loner, faded into obscurity. Conclusion. Legacy of terror. Dahmer and Bundy's legacies endure not because of their crimes, but because of what they reveal about us. They force us to ask, how does society create monsters? Why do we fixate on them while forgetting their victims? And what systems, familial, legal, cultural, allow such evil to flourish? For Dahmer's father, Lionel, the answer lay in missed opportunities. We failed to see his pain. For Bundy's survivors, it was a warning about trusting appearances. Evil doesn't always look evil. Both killers, in their own ways, hold up a mirror to our biases, our fears, and our capacity for indifference. As we close this chapter, let us remember not the men who caused such suffering, but those whose lives were stolen, the 60-plus victims whose dreams, loves, and potentials were extinguished. Their stories, not the killers, are the ones worth telling. Thank you for watching this video. You're watching Creepy Crime, and I will see you soon with the next case.